welcome back to another episode. We have a 2-4 for you this time. Equally talented Simonsons. And I'm yes, they stop it.
He's he can write, he can draw, he can letter.
Next time you're at a convention, ask for Sweezy's Superman drawing.
That'll prove that
it's completely charming.
No.
Charming. Is that the?
It is charming.
She had to have learned something from all the great artists she's worked with, aside from being married to one.
She learned a lot.
Yeah. Mike, when did you first meet these guys?
I heard about Walt when I was living in Boston. I was working for newspapers, the Boston Phoenix and the Real Paper, from 1971 to 1977. And I had a number of friends who were artists. And one of them had trained at the Rhode Island School of Design. And he said there was a guy there that he knew that was going on to work for Marvel Comics. And that was the first I'd heard of Walt. Then I met him later at a convention. And although my memory remains hazy, we were both at a convention in England at one time.
That's
and
right.
we flew back together on the same plane and arrived at dark 30. And the Simonsons put me up for the night. They were kind enough to do that, so I didn't have to go looking for a hotel. And I've never forgotten that. And I've also followed Walt's work ever since. And of course, he's most famous for his work on Thor and for creating Beta Ray Bill. But I think that most of us who have been in the in fanship for a long time know him from this. Hold yours up, Jeff. Hold yours up, Jeff. And this I got when it came out. It's copywritten 1979. Of course, he did this with Archie Goodwin, and it's brilliant work. And his style was fully formed by then. And that's something about Walt, is that his style is instantly identifiable. He doesn't really draw like anybody else, and nobody else draws like him. But he's got that magic because his art is perfectly suited for superhero comics, which he's been doing all these years.
It's true. I mean, I did work at that. I like comics. There was a book a million years ago called Whole Grains. Artie Spiegelman and somebody else edited it. I don't remember. And it's full of quotes, just from all over the world and all over the different people, different fields, everything. And there's a great quote from Karl Barks. And the quote from Karl Barks is, as I remember it, "I'm a duck man, strictly a duck man." And that's kind of how I feel about, I'm a comics guy, strictly a comics guy. So I haven't had ambitions to go out and do other stuff or get in the movies or TV or whatever it was. What I would like to be is the best possible storyteller I can be in comics. And so that's what I've worked at. And I'm a huge fan of Jack Kirby's. Part of what I liked about Jack's work was the incredible energy in it. And if I've tried to take anything from Jack, I haven't tried to draw like Jack, but I have tried to imbue my work with the kind of energy I saw in Jack's that really excited me as a reader back really when I was in college was when I discovered Jack. So I Marvel Comics in '65. So,
well, I think you succeeded at that. And not only that, you're sui generis. I think you're probably impossible to copy. Jack Kirby has inspired dozens, if not hundreds, of imitators. Steranko has inspired his imitators. Neil Adams has inspired his imitators. But nobody dares to draw in a style like yours.
That's probably because I make it up as I go along. I have no idea what I'm doing. Here's one more quote then, which I totally loved. This is Rudyard Kipling. It was from some silkscreen company. I did silkscreens a million years ago in art school. And someone like that had this quote from Rudyard Kipling. And it said, "They copied all they could follow, but they couldn't copy my mind. And I left them sweating and stealing a year and a half behind." And I thought that was great. And I will say, I mean, I have influenced a number of people. I know that.
Yeah.
But I do think that I try to solve every drawing problem as if I've never come across it before. I don't always succeed, of course. I mean, you see stuff I've done that I draw like this, and my stuff's very recognizable. But I try to not fall back into formula as much as you can. After 50 years in comics, that's probably not entirely possible. But I saw other artists in the generations ahead of me whose work had become very formulaic over time. And I mean, they made a living, stuff was fine, it read well, but it was kind of not what I wanted to do if I could avoid it, knowing that if I were around for a long time, I probably wouldn't avoid it. But I have tried to refresh myself as every job comes along in one way or another.
Did you ever thumbnail?
Yes. Oh, all the time. I'm just about, you won't be able to see too much in this. I don't take commissions mostly, but when everything shut down a couple of years ago, I agreed to do about 14 commissions. They were all single figures on 11 by 17 paper. I probably charged slightly too small amount for them, but I had not done them before, so I didn't know how much trouble they were going to be, or they weren't bad. But I have one commission I'm just starting, which is it's the last one. And it's last because it's technically more challenging than anything I've done before. It's about 44 inches across and 50 inches across and 44 inches high. And I'll be putting this up I have a more detailed drawing, but this will be an example of the thumbnails where the gentleman who wants a picture of Surtur fighting all of the Asgardians. So I have Surtur standing in a lake of fire in Muspelheim. You can see, where am I over here? Thor over here, Odin behind him. All the Asgardians will be down here. I would like to maybe put all the Asgardians Jack drew, all the individual characters, which would include Magrat the Schemer and Krolla the Duelist, who were in 3 panels. I don't know if I'll get everybody in. A bunch of fire demons fighting as well. And that'll be big. That'll be a challenge to draw something that large.
Show them.
But that was I don't know if I can bring. I don't know if I can.
That's a big
around. I'll show you. We can show what I figured. Thanks to Gene Scrocco and Greg Hildebrand, who are good friends of ours. How am I going to do this? I pick up the computer. All right, I'm gonna try to turn the computer around. If I drop it, this will be the quickest interview on record. But we'll try and do it. What I've done is, let me see if I can get this turned around. We'll see if the wires.
Shall I turn it horizontal?
Can you see it there? Yes, you can. Yes. That giant purple thing.
Wow.
Oh my camera. Just let me get that out of there. The giant purple thing is it's a foam board. It's insulation for the roof or something of that sort. It's 2 inches thick and it's about 4 feet by 5 feet. I have a giant pad of paper that a friend of mine let me take some from. And hang on a second. We ended up getting losing the picture. There we go. Or should be back. There we go. He let me have a giant sheet of paper, which is long enough for 2 of these drawings. That way, if I screw one of them up, I can remount the paper on that board and start over again. But that'll be the biggest piece I've done. And I'm just getting, but that's what the layout was for. I've done a more thorough layout, and I will probably have to go to the old classic route of gridding my layout and then putting the grid on the actual paper and blowing it up in that fashion. So there are some other techniques, this is like old master stuff.
Yeah.
I'll probably be trying as well, but we'll see how it comes out. I'll be posting bits of that on Facebook as I go along. It's not a secret. So,
it's going to be black and white?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I'm a black and white guy mostly. I've done a little color over the years. I think I colored the last 3 Manhunters a million years ago, and a few other oddball jobs, a Dr. Fate story that I drew, and some other stuff like that. But I don't do much color. And having discovered Laura Martin and Paul Mount and some other guys who are just phenomenal, it's like lettering. I used to letter my own stuff. I discovered John Workman. I tried never to letter stuff again. John could letter my stuff the way I wanted it lettered better than I could do it.
I was wondering about that, if that was all him, because you did say you did a lot of your sound effects and stuff too. Was that before him, or did he do all the stuff in Thor?
He did virtually all the stuff in Thor. The early work I first got into comics, this would include Manhunter. I used to have the letterers do all the small lettering in the balloons and captions.
Right. And
I would do all the panel borders, all the balloon borders, all the cut lines on the outside, and all my display lettering. So titles, sound effects, anything like that, I did myself. I wanted all the shapes in the drawing to be related to my drawing.
Right.
Because, you know, a word balloon in a drawing is really a positive shape inside that panel. And I wanted that balloon to look like it, you know, came from my hand. So I'm sure I was a dream for a lot of letterers because they got paid their full amount. Didn't have to bother any of that stuff for drafting out panel borders or doing the sound effects. And then when I began working with John on Alien for Heavy Metal, a graphic novel adaptation of the movie Alien, John was the art director there. He's the guy who hired me, and he lettered it. And I discovered in his work a guy who could letter the way I would like to letter if I were better at it. And his background, I mean, his lettering approach to lettering is both calligraphic and typographic. And that's where my stuff comes from. So I found somebody who can do what I can do, but better than I can do it. So I'm thrilled to have him letter this stuff. On that one, we mentioned, we talked a little before the camera went on about the Silent Manhunter story. And because that was Manhunter and I had done my own lettering on that, or at least I'd done the sound effects, I did do the sound effects on that 23-page story. Because once again, it was the way we had done it. Archie had done it a million years earlier. Right. But for the most part, John does all the lettering, including us on an art piece of artboard where I've got a panel and have a sound effect. I would draw a rectangle at whatever angle I want and the length I want it. Usually my scripts have a lot more letters than he can fit in, and he will just put in as many letters as fit. He'll drop some. He'll, you know, he won't add any, but he'll drop some. You know, I'll put in 15 T's. He'll have 3, stuff like that. Yeah, but he will. So the final sound effect is really a combination of John and me as to how it comes out.
Okay. Have you worked for other publishers other than Marvel and Heavy Metal?
I did a lot of work for my early work was for DC. When I first came to New York to get into comics, DC was producing the comics I was most interested in. I've been a Marvel guy in the 60s, loved their stuff. But by the end of the 60s, the early 70s, I felt they were kind of repeating themselves. And DC was trying a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of it didn't last very long, but it was really cool. And so I went to DC first to try and get into the business and was lucky enough to be able to do it. And I met Archie. He began feeding me small amounts of work that kept me alive. Short job here, short job there, usually backups for the war comics. And then finally, literally only about 6 months into the business, he asked me if I wanted to draw this new strip he was going to do for the back of Detective Comics called Manhunter. And I said, sure. And that was really my entry into the business. Before I began that, I was one other new kid trying to get into comics. And when that was done, all the professionals knew who I was.
It had enormous impact.
It, it won a bunch of awards. There wasn't the kind of fandom we have now. So there wasn't like a fan response the way there might be now to something like that, for good or ill. But we ended up becoming, well, Archie was already well known, but I became better known professionally because of that strip. And I never had to look for work again after that strip came out.
Yeah, Archie was my editor too on a number of titles.
He was great. He was the best.
Yeah, he was a wonderful human being. Weezy, would you tell us how you came to Marvel?
Jim Shooter asked me to come to Marvel. I was at Warren Publishing. I was the editor-in-chief there, which made me the, a big fish in a really little tiny goldfish bowl. I had played volleyball with the Marvel guys just because Walter played volleyball with the Marvel guys, and I guess they got to know me there. And I suppose Shooter was aware of the work that I did, so he asked me to come work at Marvel, and I'd edit there, and I said sure. Jim Warren was very upset with me. He had spies all over the place, and he found out that I had gone out to lunch with Jim Shooter. And I got back in the office, and he was just wroth. He was like, leave this place immediately. Whatever.
Wow.
So I did.
He was an intense human being. I went to New York once, and I interviewed Jim Warren, Stan Lee, and Barry Smith.
Oh, wow.
For Cream Magazine. I think it was all on the same day.
Oh, that's quite an accomplishment, and you lived to tell it.
Yeah, but I'll never forget Jim Warren. Is he still alive?
Yes, he is. I had a run-in with Jim, my first guy when I came in New York, actually a couple of years before I got into comics. And it was strange. I mean, that's a whole other story. But one of the great things about the way life turns out is that Jim Warren and Walter and Louise Simonson trade Christmas cards every year and occasional notes.
Yeah,
you sent
him a birthday drawing.
And I sent him a birthday drawing. I did a drawing of Vampirella and Uncle Creepy and Cousin Erie, little headshot, like a little 3 heads in a group, and sent those off to him, and he was very pleased to get it.
You know, I always liked him. He was a little volatile, but I he's kind of an amusing guy, and he really kind of let me do whatever I wanted to do, which was a lot of crazy stuff over at Warren.
Yep.
So, what's not to like, really? I mean, he would yell, but I told him that he was allowed to yell, but he wasn't allowed to yell at me. He could yell about things, which is different. And, it worked out that was the way we had it. We had a system going. I mean,
he could be just a complete pain in the ass.
Yes, he could.
But he could also be the most charming creature on God's green earth.
And, he was actually very smart, and he had a lot of good ideas. So, yeah. And he had a real eye for talent.
Yes, he did. Yep.
I mean, he employed a lot of people early who then went on to do, some pretty cool stuff.
Great stuff. Including, Archie was one of his early editors there. So,
did he ever tell you about a World War I airplane he was restoring?
Oh, yes.
We saw it.
We were out at his beach house.
Yep.
1.5 million years ago.
1.5 years ago.
And
he had his own home on the North Shore of Long Island, way out on the island. And he also, somewhere a half an hour away, a little more in, he had a cabin that he could put people up at.
A cabin, a beach house.
A little beach house, a guest house. And he would put people there. I think probably people he was trying to schmooze.
Yeah, and then he would let the people from the office go if there wasn't anybody.
That's right.
Really spectacular book.
So we were all out there one time. And I have to say, boy, Jim knew how to spend money. I mean, he spent it in wonderful ways. So he had us all come over. We were all out there for a week. Wheezy and me and some other people.
DeBay and Mahali and all the people.
One of the writers, whose name I'm blank, was a good writer, but I forgot his name. No, it wasn't Toomey. It was one of the other guys. Anyway, we ended up, he invited us out to his beach house for an afternoon. We went there. When you drove up on the road, the driveway went off, and it was a little circle that went in front of the house and then came around again. You went back out. And sitting in the circle, I'm going to have to, I don't remember this for a dead certain. I think it was a Sopwith Camel.
Yes.
It was a full-size Sopwith Camel. And so right then I said, I want to be this guy. I want to be the guy that has a Sopwith Camel in front of me. Yeah, I'm still working on that. I don't have one yet.
He had his own jukebox.
He had records pressed, 45. So it had all his, Sing, Sing, Sing by Benny Goodman. And all the songs he liked were in the jukebox. And the back side of the house was on the beach.
Right.
It faced the beach and the Long Island Sound. And between the house and the beach, there was a deck. And in the deck was a sunken pool. So you had a pool you could swim in, or you could hop up, jump onto the beach, and go out and swim in the Sound.
Yeah, he knew how to
So
do
it was nice. It was really a nice, and then just to make it sure, a Jim Warren story, there were 2 big tanks beside the house. I mean, they were 6 feet high or thereabouts. Might have been propane tanks,
propane
I think.
What they were, yeah.
And on that side of the house, there was an apartment, like a long apartment building that it was long-wise toward the ocean. So it was like this. And so all these windows facing his house. And so on the house, he had painted, or had somebody paint in line art, very simple cartoon drawings of a naked man and a naked woman. And they were anatomically correct. And he got a lot of complaints from the people who lived in the apartment building. And he could have cared less.
He did that in retaliation for something
There's
they had done. They had a feud going.
They had some stuff going back and forth. That's right. I don't remember what it was. There was some stuff going back and forth. So that was his revenge. So
was publishing the source of his wealth?
Yes.
At
that time, I think he quit publishing eventually. I thought we had assumed he was going into real estate. I don't really know, where his interest moved from publishing into other things.
Also, we've had the impression, but I don't have any real information about this, that a lot of the money he made in publishing was also because of the Captain Company.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where the money came from.
That's where the money
In a
came
way,
from.
the comics, the 3 magazines were catalogs with you bought them for the comics, but kids would, or adults, but then there'd be a catalog in the back with like a million different things he would sell, like a Wookiee mask or a a stormtrooper blaster or whatever was around, monster masks from earlier before Star Wars. And the impression that we always had was that that's where the money really came from. I don't know if that's true.
But he did the clever Disney-esque thing of making people pay $1.50 for his catalogs.
Yes.
Which I thought was just brilliant. It's like you that's a win-win situation right there.
Yeah. And I've paid money for catalogs myself, model car catalogs or pop music catalogs, and I've saved them, and some of them are worth quite a lot of money.
Oh yeah,
so you're still in contact with him.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It occurs to me we should try and interview him.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
I would be, let me drop him a note. I don't have an email for him, but I'll drop him a note and see if he'd be interested.
That'd be great.
And I presume if I hear back from him, maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'd be happy to put him in touch.
He's probably
That'd be wonderful.
Right now.
He's got to be in his mid-90s by now.
Yeah.
Thereabouts.
But he seems completely sharp when we write
and
notes.
The letters we get from him. He wrote. I had a couple of years where I didn't get Christmas cards out. I had one year where I was just slammed with work. I mean, I got them out every year just to some friends.
And Christmas cards are his job.
And they're my job, not Weezy's job. So if they don't go out, it's not Weezy's fault. And so but I had a year where I didn't get them out. The break in Christmas and Thanksgiving wasn't very long, and I just had slammed with work, and I didn't do it. It was the first time in decades. And I kept thinking, I'll get them out at the last minute, or I'll get them out right after Christmas. And eventually I just said, screw it. And I just didn't do it. And, it was kind of a relief, actually. And then the next year was like our big COVID shutdown a couple of years ago. Yeah. And I wasn't really depressed by COVID. I mean, not the way a lot of people were, but it just kind of lay on everything. And so I just didn't do it again. And eventually we got a cards from Warren those 2 years. And I got a nice little note from Jim saying, hey, where's my card? More or less. And so I wrote him back, and then we knew when his birthday was. I don't remember when it was now. And so I did a little drawing, really by way of an apology for not keeping in touch, and sent it back to him. He was really delighted with the drawing. So I got to tell you, when I first got into comics in '72, if you had said, "Oh yeah, you'll be friends with and sending Christmas cards to Jim Warren by the time you're an old man," I would never have believed you.
You should tell them the story about your interview with Jim Warren, your first meeting with Jim Warren. Like everybody has a first meeting story. I bet you've got. Yeah. I'd love to hear about your interview.
I will say mostly I do not remember when I meet people. Like the first time I meet anybody, I do remember flying back in the airplane with Mike, and he was sitting next to me. We were shooting the breeze, but mostly. Like good friends of mine, I have no idea. I just know it's about here, but I don't really remember. In Jim's case, I was at art school, the Rhode Island School of Design. I was getting interested in comics. I mean, I read them when I was in college. I went to college twice. I liked college so much I went back. And I read college the first time. Read comics. That was when Marvel was really hot, mid-'60s. And then by the time I was in art school, I'd begun to become interested in drawing them and trying my hand at them. And so I did a 25-page or 26-page comic of Thor, Marvel's Thor, that I inked. It wasn't the whole thing, because by the time I got about 25 pages into it, I didn't like my inking, and I thought, I'm going to have to learn to ink better before I finish this. And that was the time before I knew anything about whiteout or anything about crow quill pens or brushes. It's all rapidograph. And that means it's on Asgard. There's a million stars up in the sky. So the stars are all a number 2 rapidograph where you draw little circles, bigger and smaller. And then you get a number 4 rapidograph, and you fill in all the sky in the panel with a number 4 rapidograph. I mean, just insane. But I didn't know any better. So I had that comic, and I went to New York. It was in a sketch. It was in a bound sketchbook.
And how old were you at this point?
I would have been. I was I was a sophomore. So I'd already been to school. So when I went to RISD, I was 21, probably 22 or thereabouts. And I took it to New York. And that was at a time when you could show up in an office and they would frequently just let you come in.
Right.
Not so much now. And so I went to the Warren office, which at the time went to DC. I met Len and Marv. I met Neil. Sal Amendola was assigned to take me around and show me stuff. I didn't have any appointment. They said, oh yeah, say I'll show this kid around. So Murphy Anderson was there inking. I'm kind of remembering Murphy was inking in a tie and a vest and a jacket. I don't know if that's true or if I'm just, but back then it was not as casual as it would be now. So, and Murphy probably could do that and get away with it. So I did eventually go to Warren. I don't think I went to Marvel. And I went down, they were on 42nd Street, and I'd never seen an arrangement like this before. I got out of the elevator and went up to whatever floor, 5th floor, 6th floor, 3rd floor, whatever it was. And the door opened and you were in the room. Like it wasn't a hallway with doors off, but it was just like a New York loft where you walked in and there you were. And there was a guy named Chuck McNaughton who was the Warren's assistant who was working there at the time, and introduced myself. And eventually he showed me into Warren. Warren had my book and he'd looked at it and he kind of read me the riot act. I don't remember much about what was actually said, but at the end of it, kind of took me over the coat, reamed me over badly, and then said, essentially, we'll send you a script. I thought, wow. So I walked out there going, holy cow, really? I got back to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, got back there, and one day a script showed up. Now, he's not alive anymore, so I will say this, but it was a script by Gardner Fox. And I had read some Gardner Fox at DC. He was not my favorite writer. I have a broader view of that now than I had at the time. But I kind of went, holy cow, Gardner Fox, really? And I thought, I'm doomed. And what I got was a 6-page story, monster story. And on the side of the scripts for each page, there was a little box with smaller boxes inside, the layouts for essentially the panel breakdowns for each page. Now, nothing was inside them, but I followed those. I said, okay, a big panel, then 2 small ones, a big one here. I used those as my guides for my layouts. I didn't know any better, and I wouldn't have thought to just throw them out and do my own version. I penciled it. They didn't want me to ink it. They were going to get some guy, another guy, a guy who I did not know, but I knew his work. And they were going to get him to ink it. He was like me, a new guy in the biz. And I sent it in. And after a while, I got it back with a rejection notice. I got a nice note from Chuck McNaughton, which said what they'd really been looking for, these like wild layouts that I'd had in the Thor comic I'd shown them. And I thought, then why the fuck send me these little drawings that I'm supposed to be following? Those might have been Gardner Fox's little drawings.
Yep.
In order for him to figure out how to pace it. I don't know. But I have to say, I'm not ungrateful that my first job in comics was not a Gardner Fox story. Just at least that's how I felt about it at the time. So I have a broader view of Gardner's work now than I had then. But I still have the 6 pages floating around. Now, anybody out there who's on my Facebook pages, I have one, the official Walter Simonson page. If you go in, there's a gallery of old stuff, which goes back to when I was about in 3rd grade and runs up into the mid-70s. And somewhere in there, I have at least one of the pencil pages. And I will say, they're not great. I'd probably have turned them down too. Or I'd have given them to someone like Jack Davis to ink, and then or Wally Wood, and then they would have looked fine.
Nice.
But that was the other thing that Warren told me. That's right. This was really the best part. Thank you. Which was that because he was taking his valuable time to look at my work, and it was interrupting his day, he was going to pay me less than their ordinary page rate, because that would sort of compensate him for his own time. And I was green enough not to say, listen, asshole, your job, one of them, is to be an art director and look at stuff. So don't give me any crap about taking money out of my pocket. But, I wouldn't have, even if I thought of that, I wouldn't have said it at the time, since I had no leverage. But I did think it was very funny, and I was kind of crabby about it at the time. Now I just think it's funny.
I know. Yeah.
I just think, oh, Jim Warren.
Yeah, I know. It becomes an anecdote.
It becomes an anecdote. I can dine out in that story from time to time.
So, Weezy, how much work did you do for Warren?
Oh gosh, I think I was there 6 years. Walter knows how long I was
6
someplace. Yeah, okay, he's my timekeeper. I was an assistant for a couple of years, and
2
the
years.
editor-in-chief there for 4 years after that.
Yep. And you wrote a couple stories.
Oh, I did.
Or
Yeah,
one or two, not
Is
many.
that where you started writing fiction?
Yeah, I did. I didn't use my name when I was at Warren, and I didn't pay myself for them. They were things that I could just sort of slip in when things didn't come through, because I think I used Alex Southern as the name. What I didn't think it was right to take money as a writer if I was the editor. It just didn't seem right for me to hire myself, which is crazy actually now, because Bill DeBay did that all the time. I don't know how this got into my head, but it did.
Well, you didn't have a modern enough
So yeah, I did a couple
outlook on.
I did a couple of stories there. I did a story about gene splicing critters to do underwater mining. I don't know. I love gene splicing stories. You know, where you got they're part human, they're part animal, and they're created to do a task. And I don't know, for some reason that always grabs me. So I did a story about that. And I think I did a time travel story.
Maybe so.
And
also, I will say this about
the movie Splice.
We haven't seen that.
I haven't seen
I'm
that.
not sure I want to see that one, frankly. But I will say the other thing about it that Weezy didn't say quite this way is that she also felt that it was unfair for her as an editor who had a regular job to take money out of the hands of freelancers who might otherwise be writing the story that took up the 6 or 8 pages that she was filling.
That was why it took me a long time to start doing writing at Marvel, was that I didn't. Shooter wanted all of his editors to do freelance work as well. I think to see what it's like on the other side of the desk. And I didn't want to write something there just because I had a lot of writers who worked for me, and I knew they were feeding their families by writing. And if I grabbed one of their books, well, then, they're out the money. And, but then Shooter hired a batch of new editors, and I got bored. So I thought of,
because what that meant was her workload was cut in half.
Yes, and it was I could do the work fine.
And they had she had a ton of books back then. Editors had lots of books. Weezy could breeze through them.
Yeah, that's because I hired people who knew what they were doing and were really good, and I liked.
It's because Weezy was really good. Let's not kid ourselves. Folks.
I was good at picking people whose work was good.
Well, that's an important function, maybe the most important function of a good editor.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you could keep track of all of it.
I could.
Is what you could.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Except for the cover that you did for me. But that's another story.
Uh-oh.
No, that's just a funny one. But so when my work had been cut in half and I was bored, I sort of thought about creating a comic about little kids who were superheroes. And I told Shooter, I said, well, I have this idea. So maybe a mini series or whatever. Poor little kids who are superheroes, their siblings and blah, blah. And he said, okay, well, write it up. Maybe we can get a mini series out of it. We'll see. He did not have faith. I could see that. It was a crazy idea. And I wrote it up. And then June Brickman came into my office. And a lot of people can't draw kids, but it turned out that June actually could. She had spent some time at Six Flags when she was a kid doing, the portraits and, sitting for those people.
Yeah.
So, she'd drawn a lot of, people, grown-ups and kids and everything. So I handed her the script and I said, draw the kids. And if I like what you've drawn, then I'll hand us to Shooter together as a team.
She literally came into the office.
Right?
She literally came into the office the day Weezy had this
thing.
It was just complete coincidence.
Wow.
But that was the day June showed up.
Yeah. And so she took it home and she did these gorgeous little drawings. Yeah. And I, staple learned my, my treatment, I guess you'd call it, and handed it to Shooter. And several days later, Shooter came back and he said, okay, you've got yourself a regular series. The first issue is a double-size issue. And I think it's due in 2 months. It might have been 3 months. Anyway, June had never drawn a comic before. And I had never written a full long comic before. But, we managed it. And that was, that's my, I don't know. Even
We're talking about Power Pack, right?
Tossed right into the deep end of the pool. What's that?
Power Pack, right?
Power Pack.
Yes, Power Pack. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
June came back with the kids drawn in their costumes. and the little logos
nice.
on their chests.
No, actually, no,
Very cool.
She hadn't drawn the costume.
Oh, she hadn't drawn them? I thought she had drawn them.
No,
It was just for the
we
kids.
designed those later. It was the kids.
Oh,
And she, you know, and she drew them in character, like, you know, Jack, who's our
that's right.
Jack, who's our little grumpy kid, had his arms folded and his lips poked out, and you know, Katie was, you know, being her usual little cute little kid self. And I think Julie had a book, and Alex had braces. She had one of those things with.
Oh wow, nice.
So it was just cute, and Shooter loved it, which was really nice, you know, because honestly, you've got to give the guy credit because that wasn't really a crazy idea,
but it worked out.
But it worked. He liked it, so
it was a good comic.
And I guess everybody else, a lot of other people liked it too. So
that's of the books we've done. Of the books we've done, that's probably the book that has the most sustained fandom. People now that book's
no,
like
that's not true because Thor.
Thor's okay, but there are Power Pack fanatics out there.
There are Power Pack fanatics
who are.
I'm sure you'd have no trouble doing a revival.
Well, yeah, we're doing a 5-issue miniseries right now.
Oh, cool.
So you know, every once in a while they, you know,
Yeah.
pull it out and
They
dust
come
it
back
off
and they unearth the old guys and bring them back and put them back up and
in the old continuity where the kids have grown up in Marvel now.
Oh wow.
But my stories are set back in the old continuity. There's, you know, the time that it tells the story of what happened, you know, before they started, you know, they're becoming, you know, relatively grown up
the
Marvel
characters they are now. There's something about doing comics on a long-term basis. I mean, it's true in books and serial books as well, like detective stories, where you have to kind of wrestle with the problem that time goes by. So should you age your characters?
Right.
Or do they stay kind of, I mean, Robert B. Parker did the Spencer novels. You know, there's an acknowledgement that Spencer's older in more recent book. Well, he's no longer writing because he's dead, but it got older in the books, but it never affected how they behaved or anything else. It just meant when they used guns, they went from whatever they had in the old days to Sig Sauers and Glocks now. So some of that stuff changed, but the essential characters didn't change much. And in comics, that's kind of how it works. I mean, goodness knows, Franklin Richards has been any number of ages over the same time. So that is kind of a problem that if you're on a book long enough, or if your characters run long enough, some people address it, some don't. I don't care myself. I'm not wedded to the idea, oh, it's been 10 years. This guy has to be 10 years older. It's a comic book. Relax.
Yeah.
But in Gasoline Alley in the newspaper strips, people grew up and
I know that's what made it an unusual strip.
And, also, For Better or For Worse by Lynn Johnston. The characters in that aged as they went along. The kids grew up as she went along in that. So there are different ways to tackle that problem.
Didn't John Byrne say it's like 7? He thinks that it's 7 human years to a comic book year.
That's funny.
Oh, there was something.
Yeah.
I would analyze it like that. I would never even occur to me to analyze it in that sense. But there was something.
That works.
I'm sure he has some formula for working
like
that
dog
out.
years.
Dog years, yeah.
Novelists do that more frequently than comic book creators because I think one of the reasons is that the comic book, your readership is constantly turning over, and the people are familiar with the characters at a certain age. But, you know, a lot of writers were inspired by John D. MacDonald, as was I. And his Travis McGee character got older as he went along. And then in the last one, The Lonely Silver Rain, he learned that he had a daughter out of wedlock who came to live with him, and that kind of put a cap on it.
You know, I don't know. I loved the Travis McGee stuff. I read it a million years ago when it was coming out, more or less. I don't know if I've read that one. Now I'm going to have to go, we get done here, I'm going to have to go look. I'll pull up John D. MacDonald, pull out his stuff and get a good look at it. But I enjoy his work. I don't know in my case that it would be influential, especially. I was probably reading it really before I thought about comics, but I remember Denny O'Neil wrote an essay once about those kind of books, and he regarded the Travis McGee work as the Taj Mahal. I did too. That was like the pinnacle of that kind of writing and that kind of series. And
there's so many series today that are inspired by that. Like there's a guy named Randy Wayne White, who's a marine biologist that lives in Florida, who's got a character called Doc Ford. Randy Wayne White, when he was 20 years old, he wanted to be a writer. He and a friend took a boat and and beached it on McDonald's beachfront property. And they didn't know the guy from Adam and said, "Hey, Mr. McDonald, we're big fans of yours. We want to be writers." He took them in and he showed them around. They had a long afternoon.
Wow.
And now Randy Wayne White is turning out novels that are in that mode, although his character is very distinctive and no one would confuse him with McDonald. But I recommend those books.
Good for him. And good for McDonald for taking him in and
showing him around. That was terrific. It must have been transforming for him.
Yeah, I bet it was transformative for sure.
I wanted to, I'm just curious. Where did the horse-like alien come from for Power Pack?
June likes horses.
I was wondering.
She does.
She owns a horse. They're actually seahorses. They're seahorse-like aliens more than horse-like aliens. Well, little hooves and that's just.
But that was inspiration.
I had thought, for some reason, I was thinking rabbits. I'm not exactly a big Alice in Wonderland fan, but I was very imprinted by Alice in Wonderland. I was one of the first books that I can remember having read to me. I mean, I was 3, and my grandmother read it to me, and it is so weird. I mean, obviously, it sunk deep into my psyche, so that I go to Alice in Wonderland before I go to anything else, even when I don't realize I've done it until like years later. I think, oh, gee, well, there you go. That's where I got that idea. So I had thought that the aliens were white, as in, shining white, but I had thought they would be rabbits. But I didn't tell June what they would look like what I thought they'd look like, because I'm not the person in charge of that. I trusted her to come up with something really cool, and what she came up was much better than bunny rabbits, for God's sakes. I don't know what I would have been thinking, but anyway, so that was just she drew something she loved drawing.
Yeah. Now you could tell. I wanted to ask Walt too. I'm interested in some of your art style choices with some of your explosions and things. Like they almost look like Art Deco or something. Like the style of the. I'm just wondering where you came up with. I mean, I can see some of the stuff with the way that Kirby and some other people did things, but I'm just wondering, because that was, like you're saying, that's very much part of your style with making it exciting and things like that, and with all the extra kind of lines and energy and everything. But I'm just wondering where, because you did that a lot with a lot of the circles and a lot of explosions, and I don't know. I was just wondering where that came from.
I like circles. I use them a lot. I think partly, I don't know about Art Deco. I mean, I like Art Deco. Probably some of the stuff that I've done over the years, many years ago now, this is like 30 years ago or more, we were still in the city, probably came out of Russian constructivism. Yeah. I'm a big fan of some of that work. I had a book from many years ago that had a lot of the movie posters from the constructivist era. I took a short course at I'm going to say the Whitney, but I'm not sure it was the Whitney. It was somewhere up on the east side of Manhattan, and they had a little evening course on Russian constructivism, which included a brief performance, a fragment of a performance, 3 or 4 performers from some Russian constructivist play, and they really applied the ideals of that stuff to all sorts of different artistic endeavors, and that was pretty cool. I don't remember much about it now, but I did like the way they sort of the photo montage, the way that stuff worked out, and just the design elements. And so I sort of incorporated some of that into my work, but mostly, a lot of Kirby. Obviously, I'm a big Kirby Crackle fan. I use a lot of Kirby Crackle.
Yep.
But I also, I want the explosions to be. To be something. I don't want them just to be kind of random crap on a page or whatever. Right. I want them to have their own life. I mean, in a way, it's almost like doing abstract art. I'm not a giant abstract art fan per se, but when you create those, I mean, that on the one hand, it is a storytelling thing, so it's not really abstract. It's got meaning in terms of the story, but it's also something where I want the page design to be effective. The one time I did something that didn't work out. It worked out okay, but it was not what I intended to do.
Yeah.
I did the adaptation, drew the adaptation for Alien, the original movie. And at the end of Archie wrote it, the adaptation. At the end of the adaptation, about 4 or 5 pages from the end, this is a spoiler warning for anybody who hasn't seen Alien. You can turn the sound down now. But there's an explosion. I'll just say that. There's a giant explosion. And my original idea, and I inked the page like this, was I put 2 concentric circles. They were off center, so they were cropped a little on one side. I like asymmetry. And I filled in between the 2 of them with black. So they were about 1.5 inches thick, or this giant circle was. And my original plan was to take whiteout and a brush and draw a series of lines in whiteout, so it would radiate out through an equal amount of white and black and white and black and white and black. And somewhere along there, I realized I'll take the next year getting this done. That's just not going to.
And you had about 2 minutes.
I had about 2 minutes to do that job. I got that whole thing done in under 5 months, in the last third.
That was the one. I was working at Warren and coming home and coloring comics at night.
That's right.
And taking pages in and getting them in Xerox. Was I Xeroxing
at Warren?
Them? If I did, I would have paid Warren for it.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Or whatever it was. But it was someplace else I took them.
We're going to get photostats of them to get the color.
Was that it? I don't remember how we
that might have been it. We got photostats. We shrank the page down a little bit, bigger than printed size, but smaller than the originals. And that way we mounted those on chip. Actually, we paid our daughter and one of her friends to rubber cement all these photostats down on chipboard, on cardboard, so they wouldn't buckle. And then those I discovered very early on I wasn't gonna be able to color the whole thing. I didn't have time. I colored the first 8 pages, and then I could see it wasn't going to work out. So I hired Wheezy and Polly Law, who worked up at Continuity, and a good friend of ours, Deb Pedler, who was out of Pratt, and they did all the coloring from then on and the rest of it. And the color was Dr. Martin's dyes, and it was just laid down on top of the photostats. Oh. So those became the originals that were actually photographed for the book. But anyway, this explosion, I said, this is just not going to, I can't do it. It'd take too long to do it. So I had a little airbrush that I used for building model kits, putting camouflage schemes on Spitfires and stuff. And so I just used that, and I just airbrushed an explosion, which I've never done before or since. And if you look at the printed version, if you look really closely, because it was done, I did it over the photostat of this black circle. If you look really closely, you can see a little bit of green coming through the explosion where the black was. You have to know it's there. You'd never notice otherwise. Yeah. And that would come out that way. And the funniest part about that was over in Spain, they printed this in a lot of different countries, and they printed it in Spain. But in Spain, they printed it in black and white. They used the black and white films for the comic, not the color. And the result is that explosion. Here's this giant, it's a big donut of black. That's all it is. It doesn't have any blast lines. It doesn't have anything to indicate. You're going, why is this donut here in the middle of this story?
Do you still model?
What's that?
Do you still model?
I haven't for a long time. I did a lot in high school, a little after that. I was really, as a modeler, I was really into World War II single seat fighters.
Actually, you've got some up there.
Those are snap togethers. Yeah, I have I don't know if you can see it.
In the top of Walter's studio, which maybe.
So there's an ME-109 and let me see. It's over here. Pursuing it is a P-51.
Wow.
And they were big things that Toys R Us sold many years ago. They're snapped together. They're about 4 pieces. You snap the wings on the fuse. But they're really nice. They're pretty accurate as far as I can tell.
They're actually fine for using as reference.
And so I hung them up out of my ceiling here and just have a perpetual dogfight over my head. So I haven't really built models. When I did do some, depending on the book I was doing, when I did Battlestar Galactica many years ago, I drew it, and eventually I wrote and drew it. Let me get you back in here, Louise. Sorry about that. Hi. So I went out and bought all the models I could find. They had a Viper. They had the Galactica, they had a Cylon base star. Oh, and they had one of the, whatever the Cylon fighter planes were called, whatever the name of those things were. And so I bought all the kits, threw them together. The Viper I actually spent a little time on and painted it and decaled it. The others I just mostly spray painted one color so I could see the light and the dark on them when I would put light on them for effect. And I did that a couple times. I didn't build any of the Star Wars models much, but I did. I bought as many toys as you could get the Millennium Falcon. You could get all that stuff. So I bought a number of those toys. I had a real nice R2-D2 that was about so high. I have no idea what became of it. No longer around, as far as I can tell. But a lot of that stuff, I will say, the Lucas people were pretty accurate. I gather they were probably pretty careful about what came out under their name. So they were accurate enough. Although
Those days are gone.
I just saw a post probably on my page. I put up a page that showed, what was this in the Millennium Falcon? Well, or somebody posted it. Al Williamson's page, I think from Star Wars 50, the Marvel Comic 50, and it's the Millennium Falcon flying toward the viewer. And some guy notes, clearly he was using the Kepler Zorniplex model of the. I don't have any new. I don't have any idea. Al collected all that stuff. He was a fanatic for getting that, and the action figures and everything. So we did the newspaper strip and other stuff.
When you did it, Tom Palmer was your inker.
That's right. Tom inked it.
And Tommy, his son, was such a fanatic. He was like 6 or 7 years old at that point.
He was crazy.
He's such a fanatic. He would sit beside his dad and make sure his dad got everything drawn just the way it ought to be drawn.
If you screwed up the Millennium Falcon, Tommy would let him know.
And today, Tommy is an editor somewhere.
Yes, he did.
He actually was an editor for a while. I think he has his own company now.
He may have his own. He does maybe web stuff now. Yeah. But he was on his dad to make sure that stuff was accurate. Yeah. And we tried, within the confines of doing a monthly comic book, we tried to get all that stuff as correct as we could. And so we had all the models and all that stuff. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you working on now?
I just finished the Power Pack miniseries, and I just did a 3-page story with June for the what was it called?
Scott Doombeer is putting together through Zoop, through one of the crowdfunding companies, a
Sunflower Seeds. It's called
Sunflower Seeds. That is a comic designed to raise money for
Ukrainian refugees.
And Ukrainian refugees. So
you're telling me there's a new Power Pack comic in the works with June Brigman?
Oh yeah, it's a 5-part miniseries. It's done.
Oh,
so it'll be coming out.
Yeah, June has a couple of panels posted on her page every once in a while.
Yeah,
I guess mostly Marvel doesn't like it when you do that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but they're pencils.
Yeah, I've had guys at companies explain, we don't want this stuff to come out first because we want to be able to release it at the right time. And my own feeling really is you're going to have to really convince me it's not going to affect sales if I put a picture of a cover I've done up before Marvel releases the image or DC. I mean, I don't do it. I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. But I also figure, really, you're going to lose sales because I posted some. My feeling is Walt Simonson fans are all going to go, quick, run to the comic store and order this comic book now in case they miss the announcement when Marvel makes it. So I don't really believe that. But we do have a theory. This was Wheezy's theory. I won't be specific, which was that a lot of stuff companies do is not so much about creative endeavor. It's about control.
Yeah.
That the product they manufacture is largely control and comics are secondary.
It's manifested through comics.
Yeah, manifested through comics. And I have to say, as I watch things happening around America, I kind of feel the same thing is true for a chunk of America, where it's really about control. It's not about other stuff. But I'm not going to go there any further than that. That's just, I hadn't thought about that before. But there is a certain element of control that I don't know really has any effect on the sales. I mean, sales departments kind of like to run stuff. They kind of like to tell you what they want done. And I'm not convinced that makes the best comics.
Yeah.
Or even the ones that sell the best. But I think for that, you have to have a lot of freedom, really freedom to fail, because not everything you're going to do is going to work really well.
Right.
But occasionally,
sometimes it takes a while for things to catch on.
Absolutely.
And by the time people have noticing that they're good, they've pulled them.
Yeah, much of my work, like 20 years after I've done it, people go back and say, this Orion stuff wasn't too bad.
That was a genius job.
Yeah.
Why did you quit doing it, Will?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm doing a Superman thing too, a Superman story with John Bogdanov.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm drawing an 8-page story for the Ukraine book of the Star Slammers, which are characters I invented.
Cool, yeah.
I remember the Star Slammers.
So I'm doing a new Star Slammer story for that with Old Rojas, the character I did in the 5-issue miniseries. So that'll be in that book. And then we just did, well, over the last year and a half, 3 issues for Marvel, 2 of X Factor and 1 of the New Mutants. That they've all come out, but they were, Weezy wrote them and she set them back in her old continuity.
Yeah, that was the I don't know what they wanted to do. Apparently, that sort of thing sells.
Yeah. We have no idea about the business model of comics anymore.
We
don't have a clue.
As we're told. So
that's right. If the check clears, I'm good. So I did just, and actually the New Mutants job was very helpful to me because I've never drawn the New Mutants before, at least not as a book. I've done individual ones in X Factor and places like that. Right. So it was all New Mutants. It was a lot of characters. It was like a miniature X-Men Teen Titans book in 20 pages instead of in 60. There were a billion characters. So Weezy researched all that stuff for me. She found all the and of course they changed costumes all the time. So she had to find, this was set in a particular place in her continuity. So she found all the costumes for me. And I got one of those accordion folders, like 18 envelope, pockets. And we just filled it with stuff we printed off from the web of all these characters and their outfits. So I could more or less keep them straight because I couldn't remember them all. And that one, for whatever reason, I decided, because I don't do this, never did it before. I decided to ink it with marker instead of with pen and brush. I mean, I know a lot of kids do that. I say kids, not all of them are children, but they're all kids to me. Right. So a lot of them use that stuff, Copics and, the brand I always use. I can never remember the name of the damn thing. What? Is it Prisma something? No, it's Pigma. Pigma markers, and there's some other name as well. Anyway, so the stock at not Marshall's, Michael's. The Michael's craft store stock went up like 40% 1 month because I bought like $8 billion worth of markers, and I didn't know which ones were any good. So I brought them all home, tried them out, and the one whose name I cannot remember, I have to look. I can't. I'm too embarrassed.
Well, don't they fade after a while?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the answer is yes, they used to. I've got I've seen Alex Toth pages where the markers have turned red and the black line has become red and it's fading away.
Yeah, in fact, we had a little drawing upstairs.
I have a drawing upstairs.
It's almost gone now.
It's almost gone from Alex. That was for My Tour, a TV thing, one of the TV shows he did. Yeah. It's a pteranodon flying, and it's gradually flying into the distance by fading out quietly on the paper. But most of the pens now have a little says archival along the side. Oh. Now, I don't know if I believe that. So see me again in 10 years.
It's like define archival, really.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that's really true or not. They claim to be. I'll find out eventually. But I had a lot of fun doing it. Drawing with a marker like that is a lot more like sketching than using a Crow pen or even a brush. There's a freedom of it. You don't keep dipping your pen or your brush. You just kind of keep going. They don't last all that long, which is the reason I bought 5 million of them. So I could just throw them out and get to the next one. And then this is where I'm leading with the jobs I've done. Just recently, I did an 8-page story, I guess. They just had a Thor 24 came out, which was its whole number 700. They did a big issue with it. They got Jason Aaron to do a story, and I think Dan Jurgens did a story. I haven't seen the comic yet. It has come out. JR, I think, did a story. Drew, maybe Dan's story. I'm not sure. Forgotten who else is in it. And they asked me to do an 8-page Beta Red Bill story. And so I haven't done Bill in 35 years or thereabouts. That's about right. And so I come up with an idea. And again, I fit it into my old continuity because a lot has happened to Bill since I left the character. And I haven't followed a lot of that. And I don't want to go back and spend all the time researching it to do 8 pages worth of stories. It was easier to go back and just do something that fit. And so I did I enlarged on his origin somewhat. So he never shows up in the kind of Thor costume I gave him originally. They've gotten rid of that anyway, but he shows up in the armor I gave him in the first panel you see him in. And I did the layouts, and the way I normally work, I'll do the layouts, I'll put tracing paper over it, I'll indicate where all the balloons, the lettering go, I'll ship those off to John with a script, John Workman with a script. He'll letter everything, and he'll put all the panel borders in and the trim lines around the outside and all the balloon borders and everything. It'll come back to me, and then I will pencil it. I'll tighten it up at that point, because that way, if I have a little loose, I'll have like little, circles and dots and for eyes, and not quite stick figures, but very much like that, just so he has some idea of what's going on in the panel. When I get it back, if I discover I've got a balloon that covers somebody's head because I didn't guess right about the amount of space, I can redraw it, with that light pencil.
Right.
If you erase it, you don't care. So
I think all the best pencilers put in the word balloons. I think it's essential, because if you leave it to the letterer, they're gonna.
It depends on the letterer or the writer.
Of course, it does.
So I get it back. Well, actually, I sent it off to John. I get a call from John the next day. It's on Strathmore 500, which is generally really good paper. I've used it since I was in the business. And he says, I tried laying down a line for a panel border, and the ink just beat it up as if the surface of the paper had a resist on it. And so you have to lay it down 3 or 4 times to get it to lay down. And that means lettering, it's going to be just a complete pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So we discussed what to do about that. And one of the thoughts was, well, the layouts are done. I could scan them all and then print them off in blue line on good paper I've tested, and send them back to John. And then I thought, I just did this job in marker. I said, how about marker? Have you tried that? And John said, no, he hadn't tried that. And he had markers. So he tried it. He came back to me. He says, this paper takes marker as though it were designed for marker. And I said, great. So he lettered everything in marker, and I inked everything in marker. So having done this earlier job and kind of gotten used to it, I was able to breeze right through the 8 pages of Beta Ray Bill and get that done. And it was fun.
And we did discover that those pens are great for filling in blacks.
Oh, yeah, man, they're fabulous.
And I end up filling in blacks when you get really late.
Yep, this is my beautiful female assistant right here.
I've got helps me out. What can I say? And it's so much easier with these markers than it is.
Yeah.
That's like a brush marker with a very fat, flexible.
Yeah, the markers tend to go every which way. So brushes do. So
we're hoping it doesn't turn red in 10 years, but at least the job's in print. So
and if it does,
if it does, so what? So and I have to go look. Let me slip behind you for a second. It's for some reason this name never sticks in my brain. Oh, I did use Tombow markers as well.
Tombow markers.
Tombow, which were good. Microns.
Micron.
You must remember the name Micron. That's those are the ones I found most amenable to the way I work. So I used microns, and Tombows were good. The Tombow came with a plastic point. They had 2 of them, one a little harder point, one a little softer. She had a little extra line variation in it, and I found those to be very helpful as well. So those are the 2 eventually I mostly relied on.
You were telling us off air about Archie and Manhunter.
Yep.
We should definitely have you at least share that before you leave.
Okay. All right. The story was. What's that?
Enough time has passed since he first told it, so he can tell it fresh.
Maybe I can tell it fresh again. I did Manhunter. I was 6 months into my career when I started Manhunter, so a year and a half when I finished. It took about a year to do. There were 7 chapters. That was correct. And it'd been reprinted a couple times. And then DC wanted to go back in the 90s and reprint it again. And they wanted Archie and me to do a new Manhunter story. And we couldn't think of a story. The problem was we did not want to do a story that kind of fit in some weird place in the continuity to expand the space between 2 panels or whatever it would have been. And so nothing really developed. I mean, years went by while this was floating around. In the meantime, or somewhere in there, Archie developed lymphoma. I think lymphoma is correct. Yeah, and he was ill and fighting it, and then in remission and fighting it in remission for about 8 years. And one day he called me to his office. I was up at DC, just annoying editors as I tend to do. And he said he's had an idea for a story. So I went in, we sat down, and we did what we used to do in his apartment a million years ago when we were doing Manhunter. The later issues, first ones he did full script. Later we done Marvel style. And we talked about the plot. He gave me his idea, and we talked it. Mostly he plotted it. I kibitzed. But we were able to work out an 8-page story. The original chapters were pretty much all 8 pages. So we wanted an 8-page story, and it was an epilogue to the original series. And it wouldn't involve, I mean, in the original series, spoiler alert, Manhunter dies. And weren't going to bring him back. But he had an idea for something that would be logical to happen after Manhunter was gone. And it included Batman, which was just cool. It's cool to do Batman. So, and Batman's familiar with Manhunter because he and Manhunter appeared together in Manhunter's last story. So we talked it all out, got it ready. I went back to the plot, and I had other work I was doing. So I spent a couple of months. I drew a couple of covers that I didn't like, although I look at them now and I go, what is wrong with you? These look fine. But sometimes the stuff you do just doesn't look good to you right then. 6 months later, you're thinking, what was I thinking? So I had that stuff. I had a few other sketches and some other stuff. And then one day, Paul Levitz, who was I guess, publisher at the time, or editor-in-chief, whatever Paul's rank was, an old friend I'd known since he was first at DC, he called me up, I think on a Sunday, and he called to tell me that Archie had died, which I thought was very kind of Paul to let me know, just to call up like that. And I didn't learn about it in the web. I didn't find out about it from a friend. Well, I did find out about it from a friend, but not just kind of randomly out of the blue. And it was a shock because Archie had been so ill off and on. It wasn't really a surprise, but it was a shock. And I just figured that was the end of Manhunter, because that character, to me, that particular version, it's me and Archie. So I'm not going to write the dialogue. I'm not going to do a story somebody else is going to write the dialogue in. I'm done doing Manhunter. I thought, well, that's the end of that. And a couple of months later, I don't know, it came up somehow. We were talking about it. And she said, well, could you do it as a silent story? And this is why my belief is I married the best editor in comics, because I thought, wow, I wouldn't have to put the words in, but I could tell the story. So I got a hold of DC, and DC said, I explained what I wanted to do, what I thought, and they said, yeah, we're game to do it. They gave it to Denny O'Neil to edit. So I filled Denny in. He was completely hands off. And I did as a silent story. I began doing thumbnails to start with, because I really had no idea how long it would take. I knew it would take longer than our original 8 pages with no words. And there were a lot of things where I had to kind of do gestures and things that would carry the story that I wouldn't have done originally, wouldn't have had to bother originally. And I must have redrawn the first 4 or 5 pages 5 times, because I'd get started and I'd get into it, and then I could see just the pacing, it just wasn't working out. And I'd start again. And on about the 5th time or thereabouts, I got into it where I began to have it flow for me. And by the time I was done, I had 23 pages that covered the whole story. And I did my own sound effects. I'd done my sound effects back originally, so I got to do them again. I was willing to and I lettered those myself. I didn't give them to John. Since I'd done the originals, I wanted to letter them in this job. And I used them to help tell the story in a few places. I felt I wasn't cheating too much on that. And I got it all worked out. And on that one, I don't remember. That might have been Klaus Janson may have colored that. I'd have to go back and look now. But because he did color one of the reprints of Manhunter, and it may have been that one. Anyway, I was able to get it all worked out. And ultimately the book came out, and it came out with that story at the end. And it was cyclical in that in the last panel, Commissioner Gordon and Batman are walking off panel, kind of walking away, like Humphrey Bogart and Claude Rains at the end of Casablanca. And Commissioner Gordon kind of wants to know, what the hell's going on? What was all this about? And so what I did, since I have my original Manhunter pages, most of them still, I took the first page of Manhunter and I scanned it, or maybe back then I Xeroxed it. That might be a Xerox days. And I pasted it into the last page. So that's actually the original Manhunter page there, with Batman and Commissioner Gordon walking below it, and Batman is gesturing. I don't know if I actually put a word balloon around that panel or just had it up the page or had it up there, but clearly, I hope it's clear, he's telling Commissioner Gordon the story of Manhunter, which is so the last page of that job is more or less the first page of the original series. I'll tell you one more story if you got the time.
Yeah.
Sure.
If you don't, it's okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
All right. This is about the cover for Wheezy. She mentioned it earlier. Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Which
that
was
story. Okay.
Wheezy was handling a lot of books at the time. This would have been 82. Handling a lot of books. And except for this one instance I know about, she kept everything in order, everything in line. It was all in her head, everything, who had the
I
pages.
did have charts.
Well, it had charts, but who had pencils, who had inks, who had color, where the lettering was, all that stuff.
Yeah, I could remember that
And-
back in the day. Lord, I couldn't remember it now.
Oh, and at the time, I had a studio. We were living on West 71st Street, just off Central Park West, and I had a studio with some friends of mine down on West 29th Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues. Well, at the time, 82 was probably Howard Chaykin, Frank Miller, Jim Sherman, and me. And I'm not sure if Frank was in still at that time, but maybe. Anyway, so I went, Wheezy would get up in the morning and we'd get Julie off to school, and she would, and then Wheezy would head off to the office. I'd head down to the studio. And frequently, when I'm at the studio, the first thing I would do is spend a couple hours reading a book. And then I would kind of get around to work. Howard would come in, Frank, they'd be at work on the desk that 3 seconds after they were in the door. But I'm lazier than they are, so I'd read a novel, or I'd read part of a novel, and I'd get to work. And I got in, and I get a call from Wheezy. You want to explain this part? Or so? And she had a Conan book. She had, several books going out that day. One of them was an issue of Conan. And she had discovered she'd forgotten to commission a cover for it.
Yeah, it wasn't just that. It was that we were using inventory, adapting inventory that had been in the drawer for who knows how long. We were to take an old Tarzan story and turn it into a Conan story. We just had this pile of stuff that used to be stories, and we were supposed to make some other kind of story about it. So I think this was I think it was a Tarzan story.
I don't remember that. I take your word for
back
it.
in the olden days.
I did Tarzan stories of Galactic.
I said I didn't get a cover for this. I blanked on it. And you said, "What's in the story?"
That's right. She called me up and said, "I need a cover. I need it today." And we were across town from Marvel. Marvel by then.
It's who you know. It's not what you know.
Yep. So Marvel at the time was on Park Avenue South at 28th Street. So they were almost straight east of Upstart Associates, my studio. So I said, "All right, what's in the comic?" I said, "Oh, look, whatever job I was working on, before I was doing Thor, whatever I had to do for Marvel, you have to talk to Virginia Romita, because Virginia, John's wife, she is the schedule keeper. And she was a dragon. She was great. We loved Virginia.
I loved Virginia.
But I said, you talk to Virginia, and if it's okay with her that my whatever job I'm doing is going to be a day later, I'll do the cover. If she doesn't approve it, I'm not doing it. I know I'm married to you, but I'm still not doing it." So you talked to Virginia.
I talked to Virginia, and she said, "Sure."
And Wheezy got along with Virginia really well. Loved Virginia like I do. So Virginia said, he called back in 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, said, "Okay, you can do the cover." So, okay, great. What's in the comic? Well, it turns out Conan fights demon this, demon that, demon something else, different animals.
And a giant demon owl.
And a giant demon owl. I said, okay, that's all I have to know. So I sat down, I penciled furiously. I penciled a picture of a giant owl dropping out of the sky with Conan upside down in his claws, trying to strangle him, I think, or something like that. And I penciled it in a couple of hours. I grabbed my pens, my brushes, my rapidographs. I inked the crap out of it in an hour or maybe 2 hours. I got it all done by the middle of the afternoon, and I ran over to Marvel. I probably didn't run the whole way. I never had any wind, but I did run as fast as I could go. Got it over there. Wheezy got it. They slapped a trade dress on it. They got it colored in 14 seconds. I have no idea who colored it.
George,
even back
probably.
then. George probably colored. You're right. And got it colored, and it went out of the house that afternoon, just in time to make the comic book. And the really annoying part about all this for me, it remains one of my favorite covers that I've ever done. I have worked at other covers I have sweated blood over. That cover, I just went to get it finished. and it now hangs in our front hallway because it's still one of my favorite covers, and it annoys me every time I see it.
It's also an anecdote.
But it's also a good anecdote.
Yeah.
And it worked out. It came out really well. It was a good cover.
Thank you, Simonsons.
Yeah.
Been our
It's our
pleasure.
pleasure.
Thanks for
It's been a
having me.
hard interview to top.
I don't know about that, but it's been good to see you guys.
You too.
I hope we'll see you in real life down the road somewhere.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you guys take care. Everybody out there sees this. Take care. Be safe. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right.
All right.
Take